You know, Twitter truly is a hellhole. If you want to see some of the worst things imaginable and you want it right at your fingertips, the first website that you're going to want to go to is Twitter. Like, you open that website and the first thing you see is some of the most horrid stories or victim complex type personalities or just about anything that'll make you think, I'm glad I'm not as disgusting or as disturbed as that person. So I was scrolling Twitter, as everybody else has these last couple of days, and amongst the middle of all of this drama in regards to Boblax and other YouTubers, I see this tweet by a VShojo content creator named Froot, I believe that's their name. And this tweet goes, "I want to share a piece of myself with you for a moment." At first, my thoughts were, we're probably gonna get some more VTuber allegations that are gonna be interesting to cover, but no. Instead, I see all of the replies and it's people absolutely dogging on her because apparently she cheated on her husband who was away serving in the military. Now, this is going to be a little bit of an interesting video for me because I'm going into this topic completely blind. I'm going to be reading the entire document and I'm going to be seeing what I can make of it as I'm going along with you guys. So let's start the document review at page 1. All evidential screenshots were taken using Facebook's archive feature. You must read from the bottom up per screenshot. I'm not rearranging individual messages for the sake of reading convenience. All I will do is remove personal information. This document includes mentions of domestic abuse. Okay, so already we're off to a pretty interesting start. There's mentions of domestic abuse and the screenshots aren't formatted that well, so it's going to be a little bit confusing from the get. And this is a message to myself and a constant reminder of how strong I've become in the past half decade. I hope that by showing others what I've been able to overcome, that I can help people who are or have been in a similar situation. I pushed this off for a very long time because it has always been an extremely difficult topic for me to uncover. I have been healing for a very long time. When I was 19, I was abused by my then partner. How did I end up being stuck in an abusive relationship? Abusers don't start out the door with their behavior. They pretend to care about you and act like a good person so you don't leave. They start feeding you their abuse bit by bit until you're completely destroyed and unable to leave. Locked in and nowhere else to go, they use emotional blackmail and manipulate you to eventually fully depend on them and make you believe you can't do or be anything without them. They make you feel incapable of being a functional human and you will believe them. Once you're in this stage, the entire relationship becomes complete control over every aspect of your life, who you talk to, who your friends are, what you wear, how you look, how you talk, your opinions, interests, and beliefs, everything. He would constantly degrade me, insult me, lie to me. I tried to leave him on numerous occasions, but he kept threatening to commit suicide and blame it on me. He emotionally blackmailed me, manipulated me, isolated me from my family, forced me to develop dependence on him. I didn't eat, I didn't wash, I wore the same set of pajamas for weeks, I didn't move out of my bed, and I lived around trash. He caused me to become depressed. I want to preface that I am doing much better now. The airport sexual assault incident. I was on my way to America to see him. I had to stay overnight in an airport in Sweden. During my stay there, I was unfortunately sexually assaulted by a stranger. It was 1 a.m. and I had been traveling all day. I had no choice but to choose a bench to sleep on at an airport. I was already uneasy about it, but the fact that I saw many other people sleeping there made me feel a little bit safer. While I was sleeping, I woke up to a stranger sexually assaulting me. When this was happening, the only person I talked to was my ex because, as you know, at the time, I had nobody to go to other than him, since he isolated me away from my family. His response was not what I'd expect from someone in his position. I was 19 at the time, and I just thought this is how hard life is and that I have to suck it up and deal with it, which is what he taught me and is why I thought nothing of his response. So for the sake of keeping things short and concise, I'm going to paraphrase what she said in these text messages, her name being green and his name being blue. The series of text messages starts with her texting her boyfriend, saying that she fell asleep at the airport, that she could have been raped because she woke up to somebody sexually assaulting her. She then says that her phone is at very low charge and that she needs to buy a charger, that she reported the incident to the local authorities. At one point, her phone turns off and her boyfriend replies with a frowny face and him saying, "Oh fuck." She adds a little bit of commentary in the document saying, "I know people take bad news in different ways, and in some cases a frowny face is not awful, but he is usually vocal about his feelings." She mentions how she finally got her phone on because she found a charger. Her boyfriend replies with, "That's good, how are you doing?" She then says that she felt violated. that Sweden will remind her of those unfortunate circumstances forever. And the rest of the messages are really dull. In my opinion, the way her boyfriend responds is kind of interesting because the lack of things that he's saying, I feel like somebody in a normal situation like that would actually be giving a lot more concern, but that's besides the point. There's nothing too drastic going on here, nothing to really be concerned about. She then adds a little bit of commentary at the end of these messages saying, I don't know what I expected, but at least the me in 2023 would have expected more. The biggest reason why him reacting this way is an issue is because later on he would use this as an example of how much he's done for me. In future arguments, he would say that he supported me when I went through this to get a leg up on me and use it as an example of how he went the extra mile for me when I don't reciprocate regarding unrelated things in his eyes. She then attaches another series of text messages, which I will read because it's relevant. The conversation as we see it starts with him saying, who bought you a plane ticket last minute with no planning whatsoever because I fucked up but you refused to leave the airport? Me. Who got molested at said airport because of the unplanned tickets I got you? You. But who was instantly there to give you some sort of help and advice at a moment's notice? That's right, me. I can keep on going on, but when I reverse the list to see what you've done for me, when you've been there for me, you know to do your basic responsibilities as a wife. Let's see. You stopped me from killing myself when I was divorcing. You left your family just for me because of disagreements. You flew to America before I deployed. Those are notable things I remember. Now currently, I'm back to wanting to kill myself because you're not there for me. You won't be there if I need you on a moment's notice because apparently the internet is the ultimate barrier for you when it's never been one for me. Back to wanting to divorce myself from you. Now, at the end of these messages, Froot is trying to add a little bit of context, saying he's flexing about doing not even the bare minimum. Who got molested? You. Who was instantly there to give you support and advice? Me. Not instantly there, no advice, no support, just sad faces and blaming me for getting sexually assaulted by a stranger. Now, that's true, based on the messages that we saw. However, there could be some context there that we're missing. There's no way to really tell. There's also something interesting here, the mentions of divorce and suicide. Maybe there's a little bit of foreshadowing here that I'm not aware of. Who knows? I haven't read past this point yet, but we're about to. Made me choose between unconsented sex or getting cheated on. My ex was adamant on trying a form of sexual activity. I constantly said no. Even when he made jokes about it, I was still serious in saying no. He didn't respect my decision. When I went offline, after I tell him no a number of times and expressed my disappointment with his statements, he still painted me as the one in the wrong for not being comfortable with him pushing past my boundaries. The next day, I wake up to his messages implying he wanted to commit suicide over me exercising autonomy over my body. For the most part, the text messages she puts in this document are pretty much useless back and forth. To be fair, he is being a little bit pushy and trying to ask her to do something, who knows what, I'm not too sure, I'm not going to guess. And then she adds a little bit of her own context here, where she says, previously, I said the reason for me saying no, not that I have to give one, was because I was scared. Now he brings back the topic and uses it to make his own point about what he's scared of to compare himself to me, to make things he's scared about seem worse than what I'm scared of. This is how an abuser invalidates your views and guilts you into doing something you're not comfortable with. Reading the text messages really quick, he says, you know what scares me? Being poor, yet I don't mind being 2,000 in the hole because I would do it for you. And then she says, easy for you. He then replies with, call it peer pressure, call it what you want, but you cannot provide. While in my opinion, this seems pretty pushy and this seems pretty inappropriate and uncalled for, it's pretty naggy, pretty pesty. I wouldn't call it manipulation, at least per my standards. Don't get me wrong, this is absolutely something that should be frowned upon. This type of behavior is cringe and not based. However, to call it manipulation and abusive is a stretch. She then says we went from him pressuring me into doing something I said no to multiple times and threatening to sleep with another woman if I don't agree to it to I can provide, what can you do? It seems to him having autonomy over my own body is selfish. Well, she's not wrong. Yes, the guy's behavior is cringe. He shouldn't be so pushy. Sure, people have needs, but at the same time, as a man, if he wants to go through the man route, if that's what she's implying, he should have a little bit more tolerance and patience. However, what she's saying isn't exactly fully substantiated. He doesn't outright threaten her that he's going to sleep with another woman. She then says, he starts to bring up suicide. Threatening to commit suicide is a common abuse tactic that abusers will do to make you stay or do something for them. It can be a form of emotional blackmail. Every time I attempted to get out of this abuse, he would threaten self-harm to force me to stay. And then we see these text messages where he says, I really may as well be dead. What a pointless existence I'll be living with you if you're afraid to go out of your comfort zone, where you'd rather see me dead or fucking another woman before you do anything for me. Ever since this morning, where you ultimately wanted to leave me to prove how serious you are, I've been contemplating suicide again, because at the end of the day, no matter how normal my life appears to be, it will always come crashing and burning around me. Nothing will remain of what I had hope in, nothing I care about survives the test of time. So if I don't stick around, I won't be on this earth, but that's a decision I'll make for another time. I'm done living. It's the same shit over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. The suffering of my heart doesn't end. So I put up with it and cry in public or go away quietly. Okay, despite the obvious elephant in the room that most of you already know if you're watching this video, I still have to say that this is incredibly emo, my guy. This is incredibly bad. You shouldn't be reacting or behaving in this way regardless of how stacked the odds are against you. If you're really this emo, instead of trying to sort of make somebody else feel bad for you, make somebody else feel pity despite the issues, why don't you just go put on like a My Chemical Romance song and deal with it that way? Matter of fact, I have a couple of song recommendations for you if you want my playlist. The point being is that this type of self-defeatist mindset, this type of self-pitying mindset is incredibly bad, and regardless of an issue like this, you as a man, especially somebody who's an adult, should have better ways of coping with issues like these instead of, you know, just making it somebody else's problem. Even if this person isn't giving it up for you, that's not an excuse to act like such a loser. There's this part in the document right here that I want to read. No means no. I would also like to mention having children and getting married are two of the biggest ways an abuser will manipulate their partner into not being able to escape, alongside isolating them from their friends and family so that the victim has nobody else to turn to and cannot run away. The texts say, don't forget, I'll leave you if you choose not to have kids with me in the future. If we aren't working together towards our common goals, then this isn't a relationship. If I can't provide you with my presence over summer because I can't afford to, then I borrow money from a bank. If you don't want to give up, then I'll try with someone else. That's how that works. Or you just put yourself in a position where you are open-minded. I only get one woman in the world. Evidently, based on the stuff that we've seen in this document so far, this guy doesn't have any actual control over you except emotionally, if you're willing to emotionally involve yourself with this individual. He's not actually putting a child in you. He's not holding you hostage. He can't really do anything besides tell you that you're not allowed to do certain things, and evidently based on your own sentiments, you have your own autonomy. So at any point, you really could have just been like, nah, I don't really feel like you can emotionally manipulate me, and just done what you wanted to do anyways, which evidently you probably end up doing anyways. I should probably mention on some real talk that I'm not trying to dog on this girl. I know it kind of sounds like it because I'm trying to make some little jokes here and there, some little jabs, because I do know a little bit about this story. Despite the issues at hand, you should really learn how to cut your losses and not play into this sunk cost fallacy. These types of issues, when you start recognizing them, when you start seeing these patterns, it's better to just leave. And that goes for both ends of this party. For the woman, it'll be safer for you to cut your losses as early as possible and try to cut this person out of your life because this person is evidently toxic. And for the guy, if you have heavily been wronged and feel like this relationship is going to go nowhere, you shouldn't try to impose your will on the other person. It's just as bad, if not worse, because you're trying to deny that person their autonomy, which is probably significantly worse than anything you could do to anybody that is short of actually harming them. Like, this guy's behavior, despite how he may have been wronged, is not justifiable by any means. You, as a mature and functional adult, should be capable of cutting your losses and just moving away from something that could potentially be toxic. It's just the healthy and the mature and what should be the normal way to approach things. I know in the beginning I sounded very skeptical in regards to all of this, but the more I read into this, the more I'm like, maybe both of these people aren't really that great, and maybe Twitter jumped the gun on one side like they always do. There's a part in this document where this guy is a little based and he's kind of anti-LGBT, saying that he doesn't like how this person is watching a Yuri anime, which is basically girl-on-girl action. For those of you who don't know, the anime is called Citrus, and he expresses his dislike towards it because it's not natural, and he's only interested in doing what nature intended. You know, the classic jargon that some of these people do. But we're gonna skip past all of that because it's sort of irrelevant. There's this part in this section that particularly interests me, and it says, suddenly bringing up the fact that I developed depression while with him and wasn't eating or sleeping. I was perfectly fine mentally before I met him. Then to compare himself to me, saying he's successful at his current age. At this time, I was 20 years old and he was 22. The messages say, "You don't have the right to call me selfish, while being the most malnourished, sleep-deprived person I know, all because of your choices, not mine." And then she says, "Your personality and the way you act can be childish." He then says, "That's fine. I'm still 10 times more successful in my life at my current age than you ever have been." And then she says, "Gee, thanks." This part right here really infuriates me, because if you really feel this way about this girl, why not leave? At this point, you're just being an insufferable asshole, right? I was coming in ready to defend this guy because of whatever she may have done, but this is genuinely inexcusable behavior. If you're going to be behaving this way, you might as well be a 10-year-old trying to flex your toy cars for no reason because the kid next to you doesn't have toy cars, if you know what I mean. Like, this is incredibly negative behavior that can't be excused even if you've been wronged. You should be the better man, as you so claim, and just walk away from the situation instead of making it worse for both of you. There's this part here where she says the screenshot is 2 hours later, after I had just been dealing with verbal abuse for watching a Yuri anime, and I was at my breaking point. If I told him I disagree with him, he would abuse me. If I didn't have the same views as him, he would abuse me. If I didn't give up and let him win because he saw me as a competition, he would continue to abuse me the next day. None of his abuse was working, and I still didn't give in. He later called me for 115 minutes. When he called me, he would victimize himself and act like his life is the worst to make me feel sorry for him. He would constantly call himself names and put himself down to me. Me saying, "You're not a piece of shit," is a response to him telling me something like, "You probably think I'm a piece of shit," because he often twisted his words to make me look like the bad guy. Usually when I found myself not being able to breathe, it's because I'm reacting to him talking about vocally contemplating suicide. A running theme with every session of abuse he had with me was him ending the argument with threatening suicide to emotionally manipulate me. He will be a raging homophobe, and because I don't agree with it, he will use a tactic to brainwash me. He said me engaging with LGBT content threatened his career in the US Army, and eventually after 2 hours of emotional manipulation, I gave in. This is how he eventually managed to skew all of my opinions and views into becoming a carbon copy of his. I wanted to avoid abuse every way that I could. This happened every time I wanted to talk about my interests that didn't align with his. Usually when it comes to YouTuber or internet documents like these where somebody is recounting their abuse story, I would have a hard time actually considering a lot of these things abuse or sexual misconduct or whatever, because there usually is a little bit of skewing of narratives and some obfuscation of information. But in this case, it's hard to look at this and not see that this guy was being some sort of lunatic. This guy was genuinely grabbing this girl by the metaphorical balls, and it's clear to say that if we were to believe, or if we are to believe this girl at face value, then this guy is definitely unhinged and is behaving in some ways that is not normal or healthy by any reasonable standard. Up to this point in the text messages, we have seen a couple of very negative things. We see him trying to pressure her into a sex act which she already denied. We see him trying to shame her and guilt trip her for not being a good woman and experimenting and being brave and trying something new in regards to that sex act. We see him vaguely imply that he's going to attempt to do so with another woman because he's got to try it at least once before he dies. Then after that, because he didn't get what he wants, he proceeds to suicide bait like some angsty teenager. Moving on to the document, there's this part here where she says, "Cared more about a sex life than my mental health." In Jan 2018, when I had fully developed depression by being in this relationship, I was slowly falling into a hole, but my ex couldn't care less. I started drinking alcohol to feel better. Let's look at these text messages real quick because these are actually unhinged. She starts with, "I'm still in that hole. Nothing has changed from the start of the year. We've already discussed this." And then he says, "You tell yourself that if it makes you feel any better. It won't change how I feel. All it shows that being married means an end of your sex life eventually. Everyone says it, now I'm experiencing it. It was a lot easier before you decided to be depressing." And then it continues, "You already know, I consider my sex life just as important as my love life. If one's withered away, I can't say I fully love you." And then she says, "I know." Based on these text messages, I can tell this guy has basically just chipped away at this person to the point where this girl just doesn't actually know what to do anymore. This guy is so insufferable. Reading this, I'm actually feeling incredibly bad for her because I've known guys like these. I'm pretty sure everybody in their lives at one point has known a guy like this that is just so selfish and cares only about what they want, that they're willing to try to convince the other person and make them feel like a lesser being so that they have a superimposing will on that person. That's what it feels like to me. This is honestly an incredibly disgusting behavior that I don't think anybody should ever subject themselves to. So if you're in a situation like this, just being real for a moment again, you should definitely get yourself out of it. The marriage. That whole thing wasn't a real marriage. There was no wedding, no ceremony, no dress, no vows. I was alone. I had been stripped away from my family, stripped away of my hobbies, my interest, my opinions, my confidence, my self-esteem. I had nothing left but him because he made sure of that. He made me choose between him and my family and made me scared to think for myself. I had no one. I traveled alone for the first time to America at the age of 19, and it was at his home when I had nowhere to go and no way of getting myself home when he asked me to marry him. I didn't want to, but I also didn't want to know what was going to happen if I said no. So I pressured myself into saying yes on the spot. My family hated me. I hated me. He made me believe I was incapable of living without him. He made me into this pocket housewife. I never wanted any of this. I had only been dating him for less than a year at that point. I didn't want to have to deal with whatever happened if I refused, so I signed the paper. I was no longer a human being anymore. I was my abuser's property. He had full control of me now. Now he knew I couldn't leave even when I live in another country because I was now legally binded with this man, and his abuse with me worsened. I was stuck. I feel a massive amount of shame and embarrassment for myself over this. This is the biggest regret I forced myself to repress over the years. I don't consider it a chapter of my life, but a nightmare that lasted for too long. Now, I don't consider myself ever having being married, but instead I view it as a traumatic event. At the time this happened, I still never viewed it as a marriage. I only ever referred to him as my boyfriend, and I have never referred to someone as my husband because it wasn't what I wanted. He used me. In the US Army, you are required to live in the barracks on base. If you marry and have a family, you can move out of the barracks off base and have your own house. He used me so I could keep the house he acquired by marrying his ex-wife. I didn't live with him. Everything in that house was his. He lived by himself, a comfortable life in that house alone. He just exploited me for his personal gain. I was never in the picture, just a checkbox on a list. During this time, when it was supposed to be an overseas vacation to go and see him, he turned me into a housewife, demanding me to make his lunch every single day the exact way that he wanted it, making me do his chores in a house I don't live in, and if I messed up even a little bit, he would shout at me and insult me until leaving me alone to deal what he had just given me, taking out all of his frustrations at work on me. If this is all true, if we are going to take what she has to say at face value, it does sound like she was incredibly naive and got pressured into doing things that she wasn't necessarily comfortable with. Of course, I can't say that definitively because we don't actually know what happened behind the scenes or what happened between their lives. Additionally, I want to point out that this relationship seems like an internet relationship that happened to come to fruition in real life at some point or at one point. Based on this retelling, it also feels like these people just genuinely did not like each other. It feels like these people just didn't love each other at all, which makes sense because it's hard to really develop feelings when you can't really be there with a person personally, at least if it is the case that this was an internet relationship. Also, this guy seems like he's just actually using her for a possessive thing, not necessarily actually a love interest, which makes a lot of sense based on the way that he communicates with her. At least that's my opinion based on what I'm reading so far, but right now, I can't help but feel bad for her and feel like this guy wasn't ready to actually be in a relationship because he doesn't know how to behave as somebody who actually loves and supports another person for who they are. I want to address the elephant in the room really quick. Even if he was cheated on before or after, it still doesn't excuse this behavior. If you were cheated on and you managed to look past it and try to rekindle the situation, instead of trying to remedy whatever went wrong, why would you continue to behave in these ways that only push the person that you are attempting to keep in your life away from you? I was really coming into this document ready to hate on this girl based on what Twitter had to say in regards to it and the way that they reacted. However, what I'm looking at right now is that we're looking at a girl that's incredibly naive and stupid versus a guy that's genuinely a scumbag. Sure, both of these people might be scumbags for two separate reasons, but again, you can't justify this guy's behavior. Moving on to the next part, I wasn't allowed to have friends. When I was living in my student house with 6 other uni students, they liked to throw house parties in our house. After all, it was a very large house with 7 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The 2 parties were just your average university young people party, but everyone who attended was a nerd or weeb from the anime club. I wanted to join in and drink in my own house with my friends, but my ex disapproved of this. These parties happened about 3 to 4 times per year, so barely ever. I remember retreating to my room during every party because my ex was blowing up my phone and insulting me for hanging out with my own friends in my own house. I remember breaking down in front of my friends because of the emotional blackmail he would use on me to get me to leave every social situation. Based on the text messages provided in this document, I sort of am am inclined to believe what she's saying. It's not out of the realm of possibility. So again, taking her at face value, if this is true, this guy is incredibly insecure. You shouldn't really want to be controlling anybody by any means if you're a guy in a relationship, because look, if she's going to cheat on you, if she has the cheating gene, you're going to get cheated on anyways. So what you're doing by attempting to control the person to not cheat on you is that you're going to make that person despise you, and you're going to get cheated on a lot quicker. There is this section in this document here that makes me more inclined to believe what she has to say, and it starts with trying to join bank accounts when we hadn't been together for long. The relationship had just begun and I was still living with my parents while studying at university. My mom was in control of my bank account at the time. He insisted we join bank accounts. This was an early sign of abuse because it was the first time he attempted to gain control over me. I wanted to run it by my mom at first. As I declined, he then took his frustration out on me. Before we get into the text messages, I do want to say that she does raise a very valid concern, and she does make a decent point. She was only 19 at the time when this relationship started, if I recall correctly. That's not to say that, oh, she was only freshly 19, how could you? That's more to say that, yes, as a 19-year-old, as a 20-year-old, as a 21-year-old, as a 22-year-old, as a 23-year-old, in these early ages, you're still sort of figuring out your life. You're still not full of life experience yet, and I know people hate using that as an argument, but I say this because I know people that are out of college who are 26 still trying to get their shit together. There's no reason why you would want to control somebody's bank or why you would want to join each other's finances together. That sounds like a mistake made in hell. If I am to believe her at face value in what she's saying, I have to say that this guy was moving a little bit too quickly, and that's never a good sign. So let's read these text messages. I told you already, it takes two to tango. If you're not with me on finances, romance, work ethic, cleanliness, then obviously you're not. And that could be any of those. Clearly, finances will sink this relationship faster than the Titanic. From the moment you decided you don't want my help, I knew we were fucked. And then she says, I've not decided I don't want your help at all. He then says, yeah, you basically have. She then says, you're jumping to conclusions. And then he says, by telling me I'm not worth your time right now. I'm not worth it enough to give you help. She then says, why do you fail to understand that I wanted to try to sort it out with a person who is currently in control of my bank account first and to take action via what you suggested I should do? She then says, since when did I tell you you're not worth my time? You're jumping to conclusions again. He then says, the moment you said you want to take a bank account slow, fucking really? She then says, not my bank account, geez. And then he replies with, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. She then replies with, my mom saw our conversation. I'll tell you what she told me though. She said that you are controlling. It will get worse the longer our relationship progresses. She doesn't want to see me take shit from you and constantly trying to defend myself. It's bullying, as I've told you in previous argument, and that people like you never change. She doesn't want me to be in a controlling relationship like this and constantly living in the shadow of your ex-wife. As you compare me to her, she's not letting me go to America anymore because now she's worried about what you might do to me if we were to have an argument like this in person. She said that this is a form of domestic abuse and that no man should treat me like this. For the relationship to work, we have to respect one another. We have to approach each other as equals because of what she sees as empowerment. And then he says, I'm not gonna bother then. She then replies with, that's what I got this morning. And then he replies with, because at the moment I don't see as equal, and quite honestly, I'm tired of people not giving me their 100% effort. Yeah, I may have gotten out of hand yesterday, but you were being as dense as a brick wall. She then adds, he noticed how my mom got in the way of his plan, so after this he manipulated me into choosing him over her and making me cut off communication with her and made her look like the bad guy to me. My relationship with my mom never fully resolved after this entire thing. I have to say that it's really unfortunate she didn't listen to her mom sooner, because she's absolutely correct. You can absolutely tell that this guy is trying to impose his will on this woman very early on, as charged as that sounds. It's also very clear to point out the manipulative behavior he's using here. He's trying to be self-deprecating, saying that we aren't equals because you aren't putting your 100% effort, trying to guilt trip the person. Look, if that's really the case, instead of trying to make her bend to your will, you should have definitely just left early on. There's this part here where she talks about verbal abuse, and there's a couple of text messages that I'm going to particularly focus on to sort of convey how rude and how awful this guy can actually be. This particular string of text really perturbs me. She's saying everything's going to be fine, and then he says, have you fucking forgotten there's a terrorist threat in your nation? And then she says, it has been over for a week. And then he says, or are you blind? There are a million different things that can go wrong. Someone could break in, you could accidentally hurt yourself, trip and fall, so many fucking things. And I don't even know where you'd be to let someone know to get help. And then she says, well, I'm sorry you worried about me. In my opinion, this is unnecessary fear-mongering to try to be controlling. That's the way that I see it. And it's evident because of this reason in particular. They're in two separate nations. He doesn't actually have a way to measure how dangerous things are actually going to be aside of, news reports. So this is incredibly stupid. He's worrying about unnecessary things, worrying about the worst to try to put fear in her so that she doesn't take a long time to respond. And based on these text messages, she was only taking a long time to respond because she was attempting to try to get her stove to work so that she can make herself something to eat. And the rest of the conversation is basically him having this superiority complex, making herself feel inferior because she went to go ask her friends for help on how to turn on the stove, which I find incredibly moronic. This behavior is ludicrous. It's insane. This guy should probably not have access to a woman for the rest of his life. Because how are you going to worry about completely moronic things in an attempt to fearmonger this person so that she responds quicker to you? That's incredibly controlling. It's incredibly disgusting. The more I read this, like I keep saying, the more I hate this guy. There's two more parts here that I want to focus on before skipping this entire section because a lot of it is just fluff. She adds this: in the heat of an argument, he would frequently bring up the times he threatened to leave me over something and use the fact that he didn't as evidence of me being impatient or somehow in the wrong. And the messages go as, I prefer not to think about it. He then says, but yet I'm just always full of shit and I'm not patient. Yet I'm still here. She then replies with, you're always prepared to break me when things aren't going the way you'd hope them to be. And then he replies with, yeah, because sometimes loneliness is the best happiness. Oh, okay, buddy. Sure. Just go listen to some Pierce the Veil. You'll be all right. I promise you. She then adds this: all this because I AFK'd to go make food for 40 minutes. This conversation continued on longer, but his point generally remained the same. There were many instances of the same situation, whether I had stepped away to talk to my friends or AFK to focus on drawing art. And then he says, only to have to focus on myself. I mean, hell, I worried so much about you for 40 minutes today. With everything going on in England, you brush it off like fucking nothing. And then she says, I said I'm sorry. I see a repeated pattern of this guy trying to break this girl down, which I find incredibly disgusting, as I've said so many times already. I hate to repeat myself, but that's basically what's going on here. He's trying to fearmonger, trying to make himself the victim of her actions, even though she's just living her life, doing nothing worth of concern. It's incredibly disgusting that he even continues to try to make himself out like he's the superior being here when he's evidently not. Now, I did say I would read the entire document, but a lot of it really is just fluff, so I'm only gonna focus on two more sections before ending the video, so we're gonna continue with this part here. He kicked me out of his house with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. I was in the States and he was mad at me, so he kicked me out of his house. All I had were the clothes I was wearing and my phone. I couldn't drive, I was unfamiliar with the area, alone in another country, far away from home, while he was having a tantrum in his house. This was because he took me to a shooting range and I just wanted to watch him shoot and not participate. He was furious that I was reluctant to shoot his gun and refused to speak to me for 2 days. He embarrassed me in public in front of his friends over something so minor. Since this happened in person, the screenshots are from after the fact when we talked about it, and then the text messages corroborate that, where she says, but the entire 2 years have been something I associated to be negative memories now. He then says, there are so many positive memories too though. She then says, I had nobody to go to in America, no family, no friends, I can't even drive. We had an argument and you kicked me out of your house. And then he says, I don't know what I was doing. And then she says, that's just you. These text messages support the idea that he's pretty impulsive, he's very controlling, and he's generally a very childish and immature person that's also pretty irrational. Why would you kick a person who's not familiar to the area outside over something as petty as not wanting to fire a gun at a shooting range? If she's scared, just don't force her to do something she's not comfortable with. Again, more disgusting behavior. I do not like this guy. This guy is a horrible person. Also, it appears he can't take any accountability for his actions. There's these string of text messages where he says, I honestly thought we had resolved that issue after I'd done that to you. She then says, whether the issue was resolved, regardless, you forced me out of your house. I don't think that's the correct way to treat a situation. He then says, I made a mistake and you were correct. I'm only human. We all make mistakes. Sure, yeah, we all make mistakes, but that's not a mistake. You were being a childish, impulsive, immature brat. That's a horrible thing to do to somebody that's not familiar with the area. This is the last part that I'm going to focus on here. He often talked to me about how much of an awful person his ex-wife was and compared me to her. He talked about how I was just like his ex-wife and how I reminded him of her all the time, while also saying the most awful things about her. He made me believe she was a terrible person with how many negative stories he shared with me regarding her, and then made me believe I was just as bad. I told him that I do not like being compared to other people regardless, having been a twin my whole life. The text messages say, then you became her. And then she says, I used to be optimistic about everything. And then he says, oh, I know. Now you make me want to kill myself. With how you're not the awesome blank you used to be, and you do nothing to fix yourself. You're happy being a depressive woman. Look, if somebody's going through issues, particularly your partner, you really don't want to compare them to somebody that you used to hate. That's incredibly negative behavior. You don't even want to do that to some of your friends, especially if there's obviously a disdain for the person that you're comparing them to. This is obviously a guilt trip tactic. There's no reason he should be doing something that's insensitive. Also, mind you, this guy within the time of these text messages was between the ages of 21 and 22, so So having 2 wives and being divorced from 2 of them now at the age of 22 is very telling. Something tells me that this guy is the problem and not necessarily the woman he's mistreating here. She then ends off this entire document with, when it came to depression, I actually tried more than once to help myself. I went to see my GP about the depressive episode I was going through, and she told me to sort out my relationship before she can help me and sent me home. I was too scared to seek any help after that, and now I'm too scared to see a doctor about anything until something is physically wrong with me. I have much more proof of this abuse I faced back then, but I have been trying to make this document for a whole year now, and I've decided there is no value in putting my time and energy into this anymore. I am closing this chapter of my life. I have finally been able to come to terms with what happened and would like to move on. This is closure for myself. I would like to focus on continuing to bring music, art, gaming content to my community, and that is all I wish to do. After these events, I now suffer from depression and increased levels of anxiety and agoraphobia. I struggle to deal with friends and family getting too close to me, and often drift myself away in fear of getting hurt again. The home I self-isolate in is my safe space, and VTubing, drawing, art, making music, playing games is what I have found enjoyment in. I know how valuable time is, and I won't take up too much of yours. Don't let others judge how you view people. Make judgments on your own terms, by your own experiences. Thank you. So there is information of her cheating on this so-called husband, and while cheating is bad and deplorable and unforgivable, I don't think that's enough to justify this guy's terrible behavior, and I don't think that's enough to justify Twitter's mistreatment of this individual either. People on Twitter are trying to outright dismiss what she had to say and trying to make her seem like a very terrible individual, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. There is some drama with this VTuber in the past, but again, this type of treatment that she went through is undeserved for just about any woman in a relationship, or just about any man if you are also in a manipulative relationship like this. This is very disgusting behavior exhibited mainly by one party. If she did cheat, this is one of those situations where I would unfortunately have to look past it just because of how badly this person was treating her. An unfortunate reality about relationships is that you're going to get cheated on, especially when you're a horrible individual to your partner. And even if it is the case that this woman cheated on this man before these text messages, that doesn't excuse this guy's behavior, because if you're going to try to resolve a relationship or rekindle a relationship after a cheating situation like this, you're not going to behave in these horrible ways to try to give this person more fuel to hate you. The best choice and only choice that you should really do, or you should really take when it comes to situations like these, is to just leave the relationship. However, if you are attempting to salvage something from that situation after you've been cheated on, then you probably shouldn't be acting like an asshole the entire way through. So in conclusion, yes, this VTuber is probably obnoxious for cheating. She's probably a bad person for cheating. However, it's evident that she has her own problems to resolve, so I can give a little bit of leeway there. She probably needs to go through a lot of counseling to properly get to where she needs to be. But this guy is not much better and probably should never be in a relationship again in his entire life. That being said, I do hope that she does feel better. She does have reason to feel vindicated. This is not something that you should be subjected to by anybody. If she cheated or not, that's irrelevant to the fact that this guy was behaving like a complete lunatic. Obviously, that's bad, but I really don't think that she should be judged or held accountable for that past the relationship that she already went through. It's just an unfortunate situation. I hope that she can recover based on what I'm seeing on this document. And if you're somebody looking into this that wanted to know the complete story, I hope you take that word as well and try not to spread too much hate, because the more hate there is, the more types of these issues happen, unfortunately. I hope we all learned a lesson from this. That's all I got for today. Later.